Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we continue evolving our traditional Snake game with a little twist. Now, last time we recognized that the current iteration of our Snake game had a few too many conflicting elements. To solve this, the features were split into two different projects. The first of which is an action-based hybrid of a Snake game and a monster breeder. And while the early steps into the conversion process for that project were successful, we can't forget about the second project, which brings us to today's plan. Today we'll begin work on our second project to evolve out of our original Snake game project. And while the first project has some familiar elements to it, we'll be exploring a ton of new things with this project, starting with something I hope we'll be using a lot, the Bitwise operator, which we'll attempt to utilize today by creating a custom auto tile system using tiles and the tile layer. Sounds complicated indeed, so let's not waste any more time and get to the coding. First up was building the grid for both our tiles and the world itself, because this will in fact be a grid-based kind of game. And while I'm writing all of this familiar code out, let's quickly go over the basic idea for this project. This is going to be an attempt at a city builder of sorts, centered around the use of a train. That train will also be constantly in motion. The player will use that train to collect materials and eventually upgrade the train and expand the city. The goal, for now at least, will be to simply get as far as possible with whatever the world randomly generates for that run. However, it wouldn't be a Let's Dev project without a couple of twists and turns, but I'll save what those are for a later date. For now, the grids and tiles were set and ready to be automated. To start, I set up a left-click check to place a track tile down in the nearest grid cell to the mouse's position. So far so good, we can now place default track tiles down, which meant we could now get to the fun stuff. A new script was created which would be used to power the auto tile system. Next up was the addition of the Bitwise code. Now, we've used the Bitwise operator to auto tile something before. In the Survival of Let's Dev Holiday Special, we used the same chunk of code to determine an object's image index, which in turn acted as an autotiler based on the object surrounding said object. We're using the same idea here, only instead of objects, it's tiles. So I replaced all the place meeting code with grid locations based on the loop iterations. I then had the output determine which tile image is drawn to the tile map. And this method resulted in an error due to trying to access data outside the scope of the grid. So to make sure everything stayed within bounds, I clamped each check, which still gave me errors. So back in the code, for some reason, I thought it'd be easier to simply check for tiles instead. And despite being an incredibly tedious change, I was at least getting results that weren't errors. The only problem now was, well, a massive chunk of tiles were being affected at once. Thinking it was some type of out of bounds issue, I once again went through the equally tedious clamping of everything, which provided better yet still broken results. After some review, I realized I forgot to actually mark tiles in the world grid. So a check was added to the auto tile script and the tiles were then marked in the left click check. The results were still messed up, but they were different from before, which meant we were making some type of progress. So to help debug the issue, I drew the grid state to the level, which could be toggled on and off. And thankfully, this made me realize my mistake. I was originally on the right track, but on the wrong train. So now that I was actually marking the grid with the placement of track tiles, I could bring back the original grid check that we started with. And with the inclusion of clamps to prevent boundary breaks, this gave us a proper auto-tiling system. Now, when tracks are placed in the grid, the tiles surrounding it would automatically change accordingly. However, as you can see, there was still a nagging issue. T-junction connectors don't seem to exist, meaning three-way directions couldn't connect. So I took a quick break and painstakingly figured out which tiles in the tile map should have been singular lines and which should have been T-junctions. Eventually I figured it out. The darker shade of lines that you see on screen are the T-junction edits, which are in fact different from the usual crosses and singular line tracks. And now that this system is working properly, future usage of the Bitwise operator in other aspects shouldn't be too difficult. Fingers crossed. But admittedly, to get to this point took a while, most of which was my fault. So we'll have to get to those other areas next time. For now, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our start in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.